Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm Scott Solomon. I'm a cardiologist and I'm a clinical trialist. I've been fortunate enough to play a role in many of the clinical trials that have informed our therapy in heart failure, cardiac amyloidosis, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and a number of other conditions. But here's the problem. Cardiovascular clinical trials have become uniquely large, bloated, slow, and expensive. In fact, the majority of these trials never make it from phase 1 to phase 3. The average development time from phase 1 to phase 3, when it does happen, is 10 to 12 years. Most therapies never make it out of phase 2. Very few actually go to market. The mean cost of cardiovascular clinical trials is over $150 million a year for a pivotal trial, and as you know, many of these cost upwards of $500 million. So this slow development time and increased costs ends up reducing patent life, minimizes incentives for innovation, and denies, most importantly, our patients new therapies in a timely fashion. But we still need randomized controlled trials. There have been lots of concepts that have been suggested as alternatives to randomized controlled trials, including propensity matching and causal inference methods. The fact is that without randomization, we cannot determine if the effect sizes that we see are actually due to small differences in patient populations or due to the drugs that we're testing. We need randomization, and without it, we're unlikely to get approval from regulatory authorities or approval by payers for our therapies. So can we leverage artificial intelligence to speed up, de-risk, lower costs, or even bypass clinical trials? Well, there are a number of attempts that have currently being used to do just that in drug development, including, as you all know, in silico-based drug discovery and repurposing. I'm not going to talk about that today. There are some very interesting approaches, such as digital twin technology, in which you use all the information that you have about individuals and map them into a multidimensional space, and then you find people who are just like them. This is, again, an approach that could potentially, if we had enough information about people, obviate the need for randomization. AI is currently being used to analyze data from clinical trials. We do this in cardiovascular medicine now by analyzing echocardiograms using machine learning approaches, ECGs, all of that information that's coming from the wearables that we're putting on our patients in our trials, and then even using unsupervised machine learning approaches to identify which patients can benefit to a greater extent from therapies in our trials. But I think the lowest hanging fruit right now is perhaps where we can make a difference is in the operational aspects of clinical trials, the things that are currently taking so much time and so much money. Let me tell you about two of the most time-consuming, expensive, and least efficient part of clinical trials: getting patients in and getting patients out. When I say getting patients in, I mean identifying patients who fulfill the exclusion and inclusion criteria from a broad pool of patients. And getting patients out, I mean ascertaining and adjudicating the clinical events and endpoints that we use to assess therapies in clinical trials. Now, I'm going to talk mostly about the latter, getting patients out, because there's a tremendous unmet need for accurate, scalable clinical event ascertainment and adjudication. Now, as you know, most cardiovascular clinical outcomes trials rely on adjudication for assessment of endpoints. These are usually based on standard FDA criteria. Now, many diseases have similar signs and symptoms, but not all patients with fatigue, breathlessness, swollen ankles have heart failure. So the process currently is manual and very labor intensive. It requires obtaining all that source documentation from clinical sites all over the world, painstaking human review. It's accurate but very labor intensive. We sometimes also can use billing codes like ICD codes. It's become the gold standard in epidemiologic studies, claims-based studies. It's very scalable. You can do this on many, many patients, but it's imprecise. What we propose is to use automated adjudication by natural language processing. NLP is the same technology behind Siri and ChatGPT, and we think this can provide an accurate and scalable solution. The good news is that the data are located in the EMR. The bad news is that they are unstructured, located randomly, and not easily actionable. So what you see on the left is a typical discharge summary. So even with our very fancy EMRs, we still have most of our information in blobs of text, just like what you see on the left. And what we've got to get to is a structured case report form like what you see on the right. So this can be done using natural language processing, and this is a technique that has now been spearheaded by John Cunningham, one of the junior faculty in my group, who has basically taken discharge summaries from MGB over to about 2,000, adjudicated them, trained a model, selected the best model, held out a validation cohort, and then was able to show that compared to ICD codes, there was significantly better assessment as confirmed by an MD. Now, the next step, of course, is to test this in a large clinical outcomes trial. So we did that using a clinical study that we had performed with the NIH called INVESTED. It was a large vaccine trial in patients with cardiovascular disease. We had over 4,000 hospitalizations and close to 2,000 patients. And as you can see, the agreement with a clinical events committee that did this the old-fashioned way was 87%. Now, this is an approach that doesn't just give you a binary answer. It actually provides a probabilistic score, so you can say, these patients absolutely have an event, these patients absolutely don't have an event, and you can even take the ones that are in the middle and submit them for human review to improve the accuracy of the model as well. So you can imagine there are many different additional uses for this kind of technology, including identifying patients who meet entry criteria for clinical trials, in other words, getting patients in. We can use it for adverse event reporting, which currently is extremely resource intensive and expensive. We're currently developing and testing new models with a broader range of endpoints, including untrained prompted models. We're validating this in large international global clinical trials with translated documentation. This is currently undergoing FDA review, where we're going to be presenting new data at the American Heart Association, and we are actively seeking industry partners to continue to develop and validate these models in specific use cases. So with the innovative use of AI and a little bit of human wisdom, we can go a long way to making clinical trials more efficient.